Hello everyone, I'm Bill Hammond and I actually paid to see this. First things first, a very special thank you to the 1,000 plus of you who watched my last video, The Worst Trail in the World for Ticket to Paradise. It really does warm the cockles of my cynical heart, especially because I've never been that type of extroverted person who would say things like smash that like button or subscribe or any of that other stuff that a lot of other YouTubers are much more comfortable doing. It's just never been for me, so every time you do like or subscribe or comment something of substance, it really does mean a lot to me, so thank you guys so much. With that said, let's have a bit of fun. It is spooky season, and you know what? I love horror films. Always have. I mean, with the exception of jump scares and remakes, of course. Whether it's psychological, slasher, comedy, terror, it all has a place for me. So, with that in mind, just like how last year I did a rundown of my favorite Christmas movies, for Halloween, I'm going to give you my top 13 horror movies of all time. Now, this is just my personal list. I guarantee you it's going to differ from yours. There might be some in common, but it's almost mathematically impossible given the plethora of horror films out there for our list to match. You will likely wonder what the hell I'm thinking, and I'm perfectly fine with that. So why am I doing 13 films? Well, two reasons. One, I'm recording this on a Friday. You know, don't want Jason to kill me. And two, I kind of just want to one-up myself from the last list. I did 12 Christmas movies, let's do 13 Halloweens. I can't wait till I do 14 Purim movies. Alright, let's get to the list. These are my personal top 13 horror films of all time.
Number 13.
Suspiria. It certainly has its flaws, including a disjointed plot and some very bad dubbing because all the actors spoke their dialogue in their native language, be it English, German, or Italian. But whatever shortcomings this movie has, Dario Argento more than makes up for it with his bright, almost Disney-esque Technicolor nightmare designs and absolutely righteous kills, creating a fever dream Alice in Wonderland type story that will have your eyes bulging out of their sockets with every Rube Goldbergian set piece. It is genius.
Number 12.
The Evil Dead. Now, a lot of great horror films and franchises focus on the killer, but for the Evil Dead movies, it's all about our hero Ash, made into a cinematic icon by Bruce Campbell. The combination of practical effects, grotesque makeup, the claustrophobic setting, and enough blood to put the Red Cross out of business rightly made him and Sam Raimi into household names, and it showed just how creative someone can be when playing with genre conventions, as the film's direct sequels are essentially slapstick followed by fantasy action adventure. This is one of the great cult classics of all time, and if you've never seen it, you owe it to yourself, if nothing else than for the gory new meaning Raimi gives to the phrase, getting wood.
Number 11.
Psycho. I mean, how could I not include it on this list? While it may sit just outside of my personal top 10, it's arguably the most important thriller ever created. Alfred Hitchcock's suspenseful masterpiece rewrote all the rules about how to scare an audience. Anthony Perkins shines in the role that would come to define his career. Janet Leigh got a good firm grip on the title of Ultimate Scream Queen, only to eventually be overtaken by her own daughter. More on that to come. And Hitchcock himself crafts one of the most moody, atmospheric terrors ever put to celluloid. The violin stings, the shower scene, the reveal of Mrs. Bates, hell, the fact that this is the first American movie to ever show a flushing toilet. Psycho was a pioneering work that still sets the standard by which all great horror is judged.
Number 10.
The Shining. It's no secret that I love the work of Stanley Kubrick, and The Shining is a prime example of why. The meticulous nature with which Kubrick orchestrated this cabin fever descent into violence and madness offers, in addition to its pristine scares, an absolute masterclass in production design and how to use your sets and props to maximum effect. Jack Nicholson as Jack Torrance could not have been a more perfect casting, as his manic energy translates absolutely flawlessly into the character's obsession, alcoholism, and creeping insanity. Shelley Long has one of the best horror faces of all time right before the iconic "Here's Johnny" line. The parade of messed up scenery from the bathtub to the furry will just stick in your mind as vividly as red rum. To this day, it still boggles my mind that Stephen King didn't like this movie, because as much as I enjoy his work, this is by far the best adaptation of anything he's ever done.
Number 9.
Audition. Look, Takashi Miike is a genius. He just is. And if you ever need proof, you watch this movie. It's equal parts sympathetic tragedy and shocking horror show, as Miike delivers a story filled as much to the brim with nuance and emotional resonance as it is pure torture porn. The idea of a widower holding an open casting call for actresses to be his new wife is not only an intriguing concept, but it begs so many moral questions that just about any interpretation of his actions, from the noble to the misogynistic, can seem plausible. And enhancing this is his counterpart Asami, who turns the tables just so ghoulishly that she ends up being, in the most fucked up way possible, exactly what Shigehiro needs. In the end, she's a performer, doing what her role calls for, before she reveals her sadistic nature, which still weirdly plays into this persona that she projects throughout the film. Even when she's mutilating him with her needling little tease that is just so deliciously creepy, there's a hint of macabre affection. This is the type of nauseating character development that few other than Takashi Miike can provide. There's never been a better torture film, and I wouldn't be surprised if there never is one in the future.
Number 8.
Freaks. You know, Todd Browning directed the original Dracula movie back in 1931, and yet this will forever be his hallmark on the genre. Now 90 years old, no other movie has more perfectly distilled the idea of seeing what truly makes someone a monster. Even for the 1930s, the basic story of a Black Widow gold digger plotting to kill her husband for his inheritance is not a new concept, but the execution here is on another level, as Browning goes to the most extreme lengths possible to showcase the humanity of the circus sideshow performers contrasted with the villainy of the so-called normals. The kindness and dignity that Browning gives to his supposed title characters is as heartwarming as it is challenging to the preconceived notions of the audience, many of whom originally walked out in disgust. Despite all this, the film still contains some of the most terrifying scenes of its time, particularly the climactic chase and the "one of us gooble gobble" chant. For the longest time, I loved this movie simply because I felt it could never be properly remade. You know me, I hate remakes. And so no matter what someone tried, the armies of political correctness would cancel any attempt into oblivion. If a new version didn't use actual people with disabilities and deformities, or worse, CGI, there would be cries of misrepresentation. And if it did, the backlash would be based on the idea of exploitation. As such, I always thought this was one of those movies that would have to remain in its original form forever. That said, I thought the same thing about Blazing Saddles, and that somehow got turned into Paws of Fury.
Number 7.
Jesus Camp. Now I can already hear you saying, that's not horror, it's a documentary. To which I reply, tell me you haven't seen this movie without telling me you haven't seen the movie. Because if you had, you would know that directors Rachel Grady and Heidi Ewing take a very even-handed and hands-off approach even, which gives the film's subject free rein to show you just how terrifying they truly are. This is a movie where children are indoctrinated to be the next army for Christ in a coming war for America. They're encouraged to accost people in the streets to evangelize and condemn people to hell for disagreeing with them. A dedicated young Christian soldier at the camp itself is mocked endlessly because he wears eyeglasses that make him remotely resemble Harry Potter. It's awful and it's scary as hell. At one point, Becky Fisher, who used to run the now-defunct camp, says, and I quote, "I want to see young people who are as committed to the cause of Jesus Christ as the young people are to the cause of Islam. I want to see them radically laying down their lives for the gospel as they are over in Pakistan and Israel and Palestine. Only you know what? We have the truth." If that doesn't shake you to your very core, especially because those kids are now old enough to buy guns, I don't know what will.
Number 6.
Get Out. Now, if you read my top 100 of the 2010s list, you might be surprised to find this film as low as it is, especially since one of the movies in the top 5 ranks lower on that very same list. The reason for this is that I prefer Get Out as an overall work of cinema, but by a couple of degrees I like the other one as a piece of pure horror.
That said, this movie is tremendous from top to bottom, an incredible debut from Jordan Peele as a director. The cast is top-notch, the sunken place is a really cool idea, and despite the fantastical nature of the story, it's not all that far-fetched to think that rich white people would go to such lengths they do in this flick to essentially erase the existence of black people. Some of the absolute best scares come from a place of plausibility and reality, and this movie is a perfect example as to why. To this day, I can still remember leaving the theater and hearing some black audience members talking in the parking lot, wondering if Lakeith Stanfield's terror in the opening kidnapping scene was similar to what Trayvon Martin experienced in his final moments as George Zimmerman stalked him. It's not a palpable fear for me as a white man, but for a minority audience, it was all too real. That's a level of engagement rarely seen, and one of the many reasons why this movie is just so special.
Number 5. Oh, Jesus, it's hurting my voice.
The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. God, I just love all of the kills in this movie. The hammer, the meat hook, the chainsaw itself, it's all just so gratuitously rich and eerily choreographed. Leatherface is such a great design and he's cool as hell, and incidentally he's the second killer on this list based off of Ed Gein, with the other one being Norman Bates. Dude was a creepy motherfucker. But back to this film, the set pieces show you exactly why there was no better person than Tobe Hooper at the height of his powers to give you a good splatterfest. If nothing else, how do you not get this sick, giddy joy out of the dinner scene, where the desiccated cannibal grandfather has to be helped out to hit his victim on the head because he lacks the muscular strength to do it himself? It's so fucked up how hilarious it is, and I'm here for every second of it.
Number 4.
The Exorcist. I mean, come on. How could I not? Just like with Psycho. It's impossible not to include it. I mean, there are some great horror films out there, and then there are dangerous ones. Freaks was one such movie, and The Exorcist was another. Plagued with delays, injuries, accidents, and even the deaths of some of the crew members, there are some who believe the project was literally cursed. And upon its release, the film was widely denounced by religious communities who tried to outright ban it, claiming that Satan himself resided within the reels. Well, if this is the work of the devil, then good on you, mate, because the final product turned out brilliant. Ellen Burstyn and Max von Sydow are amazing, and Linda Blair went above and beyond what anyone could have ever asked of her. The special effects hold up nearly 50 years later, the overall presentation doesn't show an ounce of fear in pushing just about every envelope there is, and if nothing else, "Your mother sucks cocks in hell" is arguably the best horror one-liner in history.
Number 3.
The Cabin in the Woods. Scream sort of laid the groundwork for subverting horror tropes, but Drew Goddard and Joss Whedon took it beyond the next level. The mythology surrounding this voyeuristic ritual human sacrifice is both profound and silly at the same time. The wagering board for the instrument of our hero's demise is one of the best dark jokes in cinema history. Bradley Whitford and Richard Jenkins by themselves are just note perfect. There's a wonderful juxtaposition in casting Jules as the whore, despite being in a committed relationship, and Dana as the virgin, despite implications that she sleeps around a bit. And then, of course, there's the facility filled with monsters set to kill the teens the moment one of them is selected. The sheer chaotic slaughter that ensues when they're let out of their cages is pure horror and comedy gold, which is an exceedingly rare feat. Usually a movie can succeed on one front or the other, but hardly ever both. In calling attention to, and even subtly shaming the audience for, the catharsis we get out of the genre, The Cabin in the Woods holds up a mirror to fandom while also providing viewers with a uniquely superlative entry. And if nothing else, this was the first time I'd ever seen Chris Hemsworth in a movie. I think the guy's done pretty well for himself.
Number 2.
Halloween. God bless Rob Zombie and Danny McBride. They sure did try to do the original justice, but there is just no topping the quintessential slasher that John Carpenter gave us back in 1978. From the first notes of that iconic theme song, you are hopelessly locked in, and the tension never lets up. Filmed on a micro budget, it's amazing to me how much Carpenter was able to accomplish. From the POV of young Michael taking out his sister in the opening scene, to the fantastic fodder kills as the story progresses, to Jamie Lee Curtis becoming a feminist icon through Laurie Strode's resilience, to the fact that they made a mask of William Shatner into one of the most soulless instruments of evil ever devised. It's almost miraculous how well all this came together. Like other great franchises, the reboots and sequels never truly lived up to the original simple yet genius execution, but at the same time, this is the one horror series where different filmmakers and creative voices have tackled the impossible with their love for the original worn on their sleeves. Each subsequent edition feels more like homage and tribute than an attempt at anything new, and while that's not exactly entertaining, you can't fault them for their own affections.
Well, that's 13 through 2, but before we get to number 1, we gotta do a little bit of a tease. Here are a few honorable mentions that I love but didn't quite make the list for one reason or another.
While the sequels leaned more into comedy, the original Nightmare on Elm Street is still legit. Freddy Krueger is an iconic baddie, Robert Englund, I love him, Heather Langenkamp, great, and the world gets introduced to a young Jonathan Depp. A Tale of Two Sisters was my introduction to Asian horror, and I still love it to this day, mostly because the image of gurgling, ultra-pale, ghostly children demon things wasn't a tired cliche when the movie first came out. The original Friday the 13th still holds up to this day as a quintessential slasher film. I absolutely love the twist of Mrs. Voorhees being the killer, and in one of his earliest roles, Kevin Bacon gets the best death scene of the whole thing. A lot of people like Ari Aster's Hereditary, but for me, I prefer Midsommar. The plot is much more tight and cohesive to go along with the fucked up imagery. I absolutely love the visual effect that makes it feel like you're tripping balls with the cast, and Florence Pugh is just freaking perfect. And just for good measure, when I saw it in the theater, an earthquake actually scared half the audience away. Whatever Happened to Baby Jane is a masterpiece of psychological horror, aided in large part due to the real-life rivalry between its stars Bette Davis and Joan Crawford, each of whom play very much against type. It's no wonder that Bette Davis got her final Oscar nomination for this role. If you don't think Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory qualifies as horror, you are sorely mistaken. Just watch as these kids get offed one by one in non-lethal ways, but still pretty grotesque. And of course, if you didn't get terrified by that riverboat scene and love the film for it, you are just lying to your soul.
Number 1.
The Last House on the Left. Bet you didn't see that one coming, huh? But hear me out. Remember what I said about Freaks and The Exorcist being dangerous films? Well, what happens when you make something just as controversial and arguably gratuitous, but with absolutely no resources? You get The Last House on the Left, the directorial debut for Wes Craven and produced by Sean S. Cunningham, who would later go on to create the Friday the 13th films. With a scant budget of $90,000, about $640,000 in today's money, Craven and company had to engage in guerrilla-style filmmaking, often sneaking into wooded areas to shoot until they were caught by authorities and shooed away for not having permits. This necessitated long takes, minimal rehearsal time, and rewriting the script on the fly to accommodate the actors, half of whom were from soap operas, with the other half being actual literal porn stars, not to mention a pre-Karate Kid Martin Cove. Almost nothing went to waste or was spared in the process, and the result was one of the most divisive films of its time. Originally called Night of Vengeance, the story sees a young girl going to New York with her friend to see a concert for her birthday. When they try to score some drugs along the way, they're kidnapped by a family of 4 escaped psycho killers led by David Hess as Krug. They take the girls to a secluded forest where they are brutally raped and murdered, the quartet of criminals completely unaware that the nearby house is the home of their victim. When her parents discover what's happened, an insanely graphic comeuppance is executed for each of the 4 sadists. The film was brilliantly marketed upon its release, the title itself being an amalgam of phrases that evoke horror images. One of the film's slogans was, I kid you not, to avoid fainting, keep repeating, it's only a movie, it's only a movie. Freaking excellent. My mom used to work at a drive-in theater when she was a teenager, and when the film first came out, the response was so extreme that the concession stand jokingly sold fake life insurance policies in case of a heart attack.
She told me a story once about a night where after the movie there were 2 long lines exiting the drive-in, one of them demanding refunds and the other one asking if they could get back in to see it again. The kills are so visceral in this movie that the original cut of the film was banned in the UK until 2008, and there are so many reactionary edits by individual theaters that it's not entirely certain if Craven's original print still exists. As I said with Get Out, some of the best scares happen because the threat is real, or at least plausible. Well, that's what Last House on the Left gives its audience. What parent doesn't worry about their child out on their own in an unfamiliar environment like a big city? Who doesn't imagine violent, drug-addled criminals, especially during the onset of the war on drugs? Who honestly thinks that rapists and murderers don't exist? These are real, palpable fears that any reasonable person would have, and Wes Craven depicts that horrid scenario in stark detail. All set to a bonkers, non-diegetic soundtrack by David Hess himself that sounds like something akin to Harry Nilsson or Frank Zappa. While not revolutionary by today's standards, this is the most fucked up movie I have ever seen, and with each viewing, I admire it more and more.
So there you have it, my personal top 13 horror films ever. What do you think? What are your favorites? Let me know down in the comments below. What do you think I got right? What do you think I got wrong? I'd love to have the conversation. There are just so many great films of the genre out there that it's impossible to cover them all. I could go on for days and days and not even scratch the surface. It's such a rich art form, and I hope you enjoy them just as much as I do. Until next time, have a safe and fun Halloween, wear something skimpy, and if you want to send me free candy, I am very partial to Twix. Until next time, I'm Bill Hammond. I actually paid to see this.